Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Ben Silito, a freelance retail journalist, and I will be your moderator for today's Retail Gazette webinar called Many Happy Returns, focused on trends in online shopping and issues around the growing retail challenge of returns, and plenty more included. In a minute, I'll introduce you to two experts in the field who, for the next 45 minutes or so, are going to answer some of my questions on the industry and detail the role they play within it, pick up on some of the trends that we're seeing at the moment. But first, here's some background to the issues we are going to discuss. It's now 25 years since the first secure online transaction was completed. Cast your minds back. The year was 1994, and a young US entrepreneur running a website called Net Market sold a CD, Sting's 10 Summoners Tales album. Sold it to a friend in Philadelphia who paid securely online using his credit card. Different times indeed. E-commerce has come a long way since then. Online shopping is booming, with billions of pounds spent online every year, and analysts predicting more than half of retail purchases will be made online in the next decade. As more and more goods are bought and sold, the volume of products moving between retailer and consumer is increasingly becoming two-way, with items more frequently returned to retailers. This presents retailers with the challenge of covering costs for sales that don't generate any revenue, making customer returns and margin dilution hot topics in the boardrooms of retailers today. Joining me today to discuss this hot topic are two experts in customer returns: Ben Balfour, Commercial Director at international logistics company Advanced Supply Chain Group, and Graham Best, CEO at Rebound Returns. Ben and Graham work with retailers across the globe, developing supply chain solutions that help them to successfully manage customer returns. Ben, do you want to just give a bit of background to your business and your role within it just before we get started? Perhaps Graham could kick things off.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, Graham. Perhaps Ben needs to unmute, actually.
Yeah, I think I've got it now. Technical error there.
Okay, back to you, Ben.
Yeah, no worries. Advanced Supply Chain, we're an end-to-end technology-enabled logistics provider. We specialise in value-added services and returns handling solutions. Graham?
Yeah, sure. I'm co-founder and CEO of Rebound. We basically set out about 5 years ago to kind of rise to a challenge, and that meant building a global software platform and a logistics network, really to achieve two things, put simply. One, to allow consumers to shop with confidence anywhere to anywhere around the world, because obviously returns is intrinsically linked to outbound sales. And the second challenge was to give retailers lots of visibility and data so that they had the confidence to allow shoppers to do that. That's really the challenge we set ourselves.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for those intros, gentlemen. Look forward to hearing your insights as we go along. The first talking point that I want to focus on today is the rise in social media commerce. Ben, this is perhaps one for you to start with. Recent years have seen a growing trend of online shoppers returning more items, and we think this is set to rise further because of social media. Why is this?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's right. It's no surprise. Everybody, certainly most retailers are aware of the trends and the rise of returns and the increase in the number of returns. The rise in social media, or the use of social media now, is certainly taking over or increasing that potential for shoppers to have a wider marketplace to buy on. And consumers, as we know, they're now treating their bedrooms and bathrooms as virtual changing rooms, part of their shopping experience for them. They're buying more items, sampling them, and sending more options, and sending options back that they don't want. It's really important, though, to note that the consumer are still making really considered purchases. They're thinking about what they're buying, in the knowledge that they're going to return some of those products. It's not like going to the shop and buying what you want and then only taking what you need. The home is now the changing room. This habit's going to continue, and particularly with the rise of shopping on social media. Platforms like Facebook and Instagram have been advertising products to consumers for a long time now, but they're now evolving to sell directly to the consumer. If you look at Instagram, they've run a few beta trials on in-platform buying tools, such as Instagram Checkout and Buy on Instagram. And these are being tested. It'll make it easier for consumers to buy in real time when they're scrolling through social media. So less of a considered choice about the purchase, more of a, I'm on here, I'm looking, so I'm going to make that purchase because it's there. So it's more impulsive. On the news today, PayPal announced that the number of UK businesses selling on social media is likely to double in the next 6 months. So that means about an extra 600,000 businesses will be selling through the likes of Facebook and Instagram. So we're going to see more consumers making more snap decisions in terms of purchases.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff, and it's an area of the industry that I'm following following quite closely and cover for various trade magazines. I understand that you've surveyed consumers about these changes in social media and the impacts on their online shopping. Do you want to provide a bit of detail around that?
Yeah, sure. We carried out a survey from 2,000 online shoppers and what changes social media and the impacts on online shopping might bring in. I think I need to point out we're not a B2C provider. We are a B2B. We work in the B2B marketplace. However, it's really important for us to understand our customers, so the consumer, and what their shopping habits are for us to design the right solution for our retail partners. Ultimately, we need to be serving the needs of their customers. With this in mind, we're seeing social media platforms evolving at a pace and becoming much more shoppable. Of the 2,000 online shoppers that we surveyed in the UK, about a third of them, 34%, told us that being able to buy direct in social media will cause them to make more impulse purchases. They'll buy more things on the spur of the moment, that's for sure, because they'll be giving these items less consideration. Like I said before, they'll be scrolling through, making those choices. It'll become more, the product's there. It's easy, it's more accessible for them to make these purchases, and they've got a cooling off period. So they'll buy that product, they'll sell that product, they'll send it back. So we're going to see a rise in the number of returns due to the ease of accessibility. And the modern consumer is all about convenience. And if it's in front of them, if they've got the opportunity, they'll make that purchase. 63% of those of the 34% though. The social media shoppers said they'll return more items. So this is an equivalent to a fifth of all online shoppers are going to be returning more product. So the traditional methods of e-tail and e-tail commerce, yeah, there's a rise in returns anyway. It's a changing trend in the consumer habits. We're going to see an increase in that because of the ease of accessibility.
Perhaps a good opportunity to bring Graham in at this stage. Graham, retailers have worked hard for many years to encourage impulse purchases. You see it everywhere, don't you? In store and online. You bought this. You might want to buy this. Those kind of things. So such spontaneous sales can bulk out baskets and prove a valuable revenue stream, and have done for years. Can retailers capitalise on the opportunity of social media boosting impulse purchases? Or does more returned items mean less margin? So which area do they have to focus on there?
It's a good question. I guess all of it really. I mean, you've probably seen a picture of me at the start. My generation aren't exactly the social media pioneers. We're kind of playing catch up a bit, but I employ an awful lot of people who are social media experts, and they live and breathe it. And if you look at our customer base, which is predominantly retail fashion, and we're a B2C company. So out of our sort of 500 customers, the average age would be, 20, as opposed to 50 or 60. So I think social media is just going to be a game changer. And there's some positive and negatives about that. I think there's a bit of a negative association with social media and returns at the moment. I think, you look at people buying stuff, trying it on for the photograph and sending it back. But I think, there's a bit too much negativity around that. And from the studies we've done, I mean, serial returners are not necessarily unprofitable. In fact, serial returners can turn out to be the most profitable shoppers. That's what the data actually supports. So I think it's all about really data and understanding if you're going to put an impulse purchase incentive out there, and then that you'll get a return included, so they go over that minimum spend. Just understand that you're doing it. But I think the sort of one customer at a time world is ended, and we're now into a lifetime value of a customer. And all the work I've seen with our customers and what we're doing ourselves is all around that. Let's sell someone the right thing in the first place. Let's understand that returns are a fact of life, and we're not going to go and prevent returns, but at least we can optimize them. And we can throw all sorts of stats around, and there's lots of stuff out there. I tend to be more of a trend guy than a stat guy. If you want stats, you can go on a website and see lots of stuff. But the evidence is all towards, for me, you've got to be almost down to an individual consumer level in terms of how you target this sort of stuff. And don't put promotions in front of the wrong people and encourage returns behavior for the wrong reasons. But returns is a positive. It's not a negative. It's just a case of how you actually deploy it. So that would be my 2 pennies.
Yeah, and you're right. The personalization is a big issue for retailers at the moment, isn't it? And that's knowing your customers, making sure you're putting the right offers and promotions in front of the ones that they're going to be most suitable for. With all that in mind, Graham, how do retailers embrace returns to protect margins and profits? Everything comes back to the bottom line. What should they be doing to look after that?
I think for me, the 2 words would be, don't guess. Get some data around you and start making the right decisions. Because, going back in the day 5 years ago when we started, returns was just basically a blind spot or a problem. And many of the brands we work with now, 5 years ago, would just rather it all just went away. They're now actually pioneers of all sorts of different returns innovation. So I think in terms of margin and profit, you can make those calculations if you have the data around you. There's no reason why returns has to be free returns, for example. Free returns used to be, you should just never say that in a crowded room because everybody would panic. I think what you need to look at is a free return the right thing to do in this country or with this product or in this area of the world or time scale versus blanket policies that just go across the world because the world's not written that way. It doesn't work that way. So I think, people have got to put work into it, basically. We publish a lot of stuff around building a business case for returns. And if you look at most businesses, you won't find the returns expert. You won't find a director of returns at board level, even though in, say, fashion, you might get 25% of the product coming back. You don't have really someone up there saying, to your point, is it profitable or is it not profitable? And how do we change the behavior of our own company to make it go one way or the other? So I think they need a business case. They need to embrace things like free returns, but that's not, I say, a blanket policy. But they need to challenge the perception of returns from a negative to a positive, because for me, what's happened over the last few years, and I saw that as I was building the business, is all of a sudden one day shoppers turned up and turned to retailers and said, returns is not our problem anymore, it's yours. So you better fix it. And I think you're seeing the reaction to that. It is complex, but you've got to get some data around you and you've got to make the decisions based on that data.
Really interesting stuff. And you talk about maybe a new job title there. We've had over the last few years, we've had chief customer officer. I've even seen things like head of customer happiness, and now it looks like maybe companies and retailers should be sort of considering director of returns operations, or head of customer returns. It's fascinating.
Well, if you look at the, I think it's quite an important area, because if you look at that and look at the typical stakeholders that would make the decision to go ahead with my company, for example, 5 years ago, I'd be the logistics manager. These days, it's the head of e-commerce, it's the FD, it's the logistics manager, it's the head of marketing, it's head of sales. It's a company-wide challenge, and you need a consensus because it affects every stage of the business. But I think you do need that leader who at board level can say, right, this is priority number 2, and get ahead of it.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Moving on to the next subject, I want to talk about creating competitive advantage. And perhaps this is one for you, Ben. Graham mentions embracing returns to create a competitive edge. if an item is returned, there's potentially no revenue from a sale, and yet a retailer is faced with covering costs of moving that product to and from the consumer. Can this really improve competitiveness? Do you want to maybe underline some ways that it can, and some of the issues around that?
Yeah, sure. Very much echoing what Graham said earlier about returns. We have to embrace it. It's going to happen, so you have to have a clear strategy to manage those returns. And retailers do. Retailers, or most retailers, have got a very clear strategy on how they want to manage those returns. Something that Graham and I have talked about in the past is about blind spots. The work we carry out for our customers is very much within the four walls. So once the product's been returned into our network, we're seeing what that product is, and we can act on that. The more joined up logistics providers become with the likes of Rebound and Advanced, the different services we provide, it will enable the retailer to make quicker decisions, better decisions soon, and those decisions can be made much earlier on. So greater visibility, knowing what's coming back, when it's coming back, is really important. 30% of your inventory might be sat out in the network at any given time, and you've got no visibility or limited visibility of where that product is. If you know when it's coming back, you can make better decisions. Giving that to putting that back into the supply chain, we can take that data, we can prioritize product, we can manage that product back into the return center, deliver it back into the back out into the network, make it available to be repurchased, and effectively reduce the margin dilution of that product, because we're speeding up the whole of that process. It's inevitable that you're going to get the returns, and those percentages are likely to grow. As a supply chain, and using that as a competitive advantage, we have to work in partnership with everybody in that supply chain to deliver the best solution. We can only do that if we're more joined up. So businesses have got to make the returns solution part of their business strategy, and the good ones are, and there's a lot out there that are really making great headway into how they're going to manage this way. We've got to address the planning to make sure that we understand what's coming back, we can manage the peaks and troughs better, and it's the levels of planning that'll streamline the returns process, not just internally to improve operations, but also in the eyes of the consumer and enhance their experience of dealing with that particular retailer. Graham mentioned, I think earlier, that shoppers are they're fickle as well. If they don't have a seamless, clean experience, they'll move on as well. So we've got to really focus on the consumers and using the supply chain to deliver what the consumer wants, and have a very joined up, clear process.
Yeah, it's certainly a growing area of focus for the retailers that I'm talking to, and this all resonates quite clearly. But Graham, Ben talked there about processing of products and getting them ready for resale. Supply chain management is obviously critical to this. What does that process entail?
I think Ben touched on it really well. It's in one word, it's collaboration. I think if you look at our industry, but you look at any other industry, you get bigger companies big companies get bigger, and there's an awful lot of talk about valuation of businesses. They're not really talking about value of businesses as much as I'd like. So, we get up every morning and we try and think like a retailer, and we try and think like a consumer, and that's put us in a very good place, because then you're not constrained by proprietary thinking or by silo thinking. You're looking at across their supply chain from a retailer's lens and a consumer's lens to say, okay, does this work? Does it all hang together? And how could you improve it? So I think, if we can think like a retailer, and I think Advanced do that, and we work with many other companies around the world that do that. I can't solve everybody's problems. Rebound does what it does. It provides the answer to the blind spot that someone like Advanced is faced with. So, it's coming back from all over the world in all sorts of different ways and shapes and sizes. If we can provide that information to Advanced, say, thinking from a retailer's perspective, then Advanced are going to do an even better job of turning that round and creating value from it. So it's not rocket science. I just think that It's the supply chain that's out there right now is an old one. If you look at the outbound supply chain that's been around forever, the delivery supply chain, there's a completely different thinking required for returns. If you look at it, it's absolutely the opposite way around. You're not taking thousands of parcels on a pallet and sending them to a country and then they go into individual houses. It's actually the other way around. And that sounds simple, but it's not. So you've got to recognize from a retailer's point of view, there is complexity in the supply chain that they've never seen before. So it's no accident that, we're growing like mad, but we didn't invent returns. It's been around for thousands of years. We've just taken a better approach to it. And I think if you can look at that supply chain afresh and say, okay, if rebound can't solve all your problems and advanced can't solve all your problems, but the combination of advanced and rebound, for example, is a different answer and gives the retailer a completely different approach, which inevitably is going to affect their consumers, everybody benefits. And I don't think it's a cost thing. I don't think it's about millions and billions of investment. I think it's about collaboration is largely to do with companies being grown up enough to say, look, dear Mr. Retailer, we're going to solve what we do in the best possible way, but we need to work with others to give you a better answer overall. That's what I think about it. Back to data. We need analytics. You're sitting there as a retailer, and I've seen a lot of retailers present over the years brilliant solutions where they're almost looking at a control tower concept where all of their supply chain is mapped. They're getting alerts about what things are happening in that supply chain way ahead of time. So they're not driving in the rear view mirror. They're actually proactively building their business, and they're surrounded by all the right data, and it's dynamic. Quite impressive stuff. And there's only a few examples of that I've seen, and that comes down to collaboration.
It's really, really good insights, Graham. And then beyond the operational elements this technology brings, are there other benefits to this kind of supply chain technology that Graham discusses?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again and move on. But having full visibility of a returned item in the supply chain helps with your planning, helps prepare the operators and the warehouses to get that product back and ready for resale, so it can be sent out to another customer. During the research that we carried out, waiting for a refund was also a major frustration for 20% of the consumers after the item had been returned. And they were also referred to the frustrations of not knowing the status of a return. And I believe Rebound can help with that as well. So with this technology, we can keep consumers updated on the progress of their return. We can manage that information. We can join up. We can collaborate and provide better information for the consumer, giving the consumer a much more enjoyable journey. The modern consumer wants to know what's happening. They want to know where their money is. They want to know where their product is. They want to feel that there is a process behind it that's keeping them informed all the way. They want visibility, like the retailer wants visibility. And if we can working collaboratively, we can bring that same experience from the B2B to the B2C marketplace as well.
It's neatly well. We're going on to the next subject now. As the slide suggests, it's a hot topic, not one that you can cover. You can't cover it all in the space of 10 minutes or so on a webinar, but it's worthy of mention in such a presentation as this. Returns and sustainability, and developing returns policies around sustainability. Thinking about customer satisfaction, how important is sustainability during returns? Graham, if retailers are striving for that competitive advantage, do their returns policies need to be green in this day and age? And I could almost answer that for you. They need to be green, but how do they make them green, and what kind of issues are going on at the moment in this space to make sure retailers are being as sustainable as possible?
Okay. I think it's definitely a hot topic. We had our own sort of returns event, October just gone, which was our second year we've done that in London. And we all came away from that event thinking, right, sustainability was mentioned and mentioned and mentioned, and it clearly is a hot topic, and it's not going away. And I think it's very much driven from a certain generation. If you look at the kind of political side of this, they're not actually on the hook to be more sustainable, but I think that's coming. and we're kind of in the middle of those discussions ourselves to see which way that's going. We've invested in our own sustainability project because we need to kind of eat our own cooking and show people that we're trying to make our own supply chain and our partners in that network more sustainable. I think from a retailer's point of view, you know, there's some immediate stuff you can do. One of the things about returns is, you know, there's one simple trick, which you can speed up the refund and you can slow down the logistics. So you can get a greener logistics answer by slowing that down because you know where it is, what it is, and where it's going. And that's where working with someone like Advance comes in. But you can keep your consumers happy by recycling their cash, you know, before it even leaves the country or when they register the return on the portal. So I think there's some tactical stuff you can get into now. It comes back to choice, really. I mean, the whole rebound philosophy is around that choice. You know, how do you want to do it? And it's our job to facilitate it and hopefully come up with some sort of good ideas about strategy and what your competition's doing. And on that basis, I think sustainability is a little bit like returns itself. I think people instinctively want to do something about it. I don't think the supply chain's necessarily geared up to it as it might be, and I think there's lots of improvements to aim for there. But I think they'll also look at their competitors and they'll say, okay, how sustainable is my competitor? If their competitor's more sustainable than them in terms of their supply chain management and the choice they offer on purchase, they're more likely to do something about it. So we're no different from any other company. We started 5 years ago with a few really big customers, and they've been fantastically influential in helping us grow and build because they're the pioneers. And I think you'll see the same in sustainability. I think some of the, you know, especially in the fashion brand side, you know, these phenomenally fast-growing companies, very, very young customer base. Their consumers want to buy in a sustainable fashion. They'll probably spend a little bit more on that basis. They may actually be more savvy about buying the right products to avoid returns because they don't want the, you know, the cost to the planet of increasing returns and having it being partly their fault. I think the other thing is around waste. So we're involved in projects around, you know, reducing landfill. I'd like to get a better answer to help retailers give excess stock and returns to charity, for example, whether it's fashion or it's iPod cases or whatever it is. I think we've all got a bit of a job to do there. And from what I've seen going around the world, this is definitely not going away, and it shouldn't. And I think that in the UK, Europe, it's probably a much stronger pull to get this right than anywhere else in the world. But it's all possible. It comes down to all the players in it being willing, which again comes back to that word I keep hammering to death, which is about collaboration. You cannot get a sustainable supply chain for returns on your own. You have to collaborate.
An important point indeed. And Ben, you've mentioned the research you've done on returns and consumer research. When you surveyed shoppers, I assume you asked them about sustainability and preference for greener return services. What did you find in that space? Any interesting snippets to share?
I mean, it's information I've heard before, but it was good to get it ourselves, or from our own research anyway. Whilst shoppers are increasingly carbon conscious, it's still not the biggest factor. Whilst it's a big factor, it's not the biggest factor that influences their thinking when it comes to a return. 43% of online shoppers are more likely to choose a retailer that offered a green return service, where one courier is already in the area close to their home or work and comes to collect the return from them. However, you've got to consider the preference for paying for such a green return service was just 22%. So whilst they like the idea of the a green service, a more sustainable service, they're not prepared to pay for it yet. And I think that's the challenge for the retailers, and also the consumer, and to a degree ourselves in the logistics network. How are we going to face into that headwind? Shoppers want to be more carbon conscious. They want a greener solution, but it's the cost of that. No one wants to pay for it. I mean, we're living in a different environmental conscience these days, so we've got to bear that in mind. So,
and was there anything that your research found out about what what consumers would prioritise? What is their key requirement?
Yeah, so the key requirement for the customer, being environmentally friendly is important, and something that's likely to influence their purchasing more and more, especially as more eco-active younger generations grow up. They're going to become today's youth is tomorrow's shopper, and they are more environmentally aware. Retailers can't discount sustainability though, and they need to ensure that they're addressing the carbon footprints as part of their strategy. It's important that it's part of the journey. Effectively, we're all on a sustainable journey, a green journey. Advance ourselves are on the same journey, and we've got to work on joint projects with the retailers to deliver this. The important point though at the moment is that whilst sustainability is high on everybody's agenda, I think the data that we saw that came back from the research that we did was that it's still very much a consumer-centric returns policy that's the driver for the retailer when they're making their decisions. Effectively make it as cheap or free of charge and as quick as easy and easy as possible for the consumer to send something back. That's still the main driving factor in the modern consumer's thinking, although sustainability is creeping up there.
Okay, thanks for sharing some of those findings, Ben. Graham, did you have any other thoughts retailers should be considering, in terms of creating or reviewing their current returns policies? Anything else to add on this section before we move on?
Yeah, loads really. Bearing
in mind we've got a slight time limit.
I think to sort of narrow it down, I think people talk about returns policies, and I think that's probably a mistake. I think it's a return strategy, and I know it's only a small difference, but I think what I've seen is that returns strategy needs to be really dynamic. I'm afraid it's a pain, but it will never end. You need to be as dynamic with that as you are with all the rest of your business. It can't be, as you may look at it from a retailer's perspective on outbound delivery, for example, you might sign a contract to deliver parcels to, Israel, and you'll sign a contract and that'll be that. And then you'll agree an SLA and you'll move on. I'm afraid returns isn't like that. It's completely integrated with the rest of the company, like a spider in a web. Every time something happens, it will reflect returns. So, but it's worth getting right. So I think what you've got to do is you've got to model some outcomes. And I think that when they're reviewing their strategy, it's a big decision to do free returns, or it's a big decision to do free returns for a period. I mean, my job is to put all the tools in place to allow retailers to do that. But fundamentally, they've got enough data around them already and the people around them already to actually model an outcome. So, if we have a return strategy of X, what's that likely to do? And get a bit on the front foot when it comes to this. And during the webinar, we've talked about margin and erosion or increasing that, sustainability, customer retention. All of these things, I think, need to be modeled. And there's a really good way of doing that. You can look what your competition's doing. And there's an enormous amount of information out there about what your biggest competitors are doing in this space. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can take some best practice from others. We do mystery shopping so that we can show a retailer what their experience is like for a consumer. And we benchmark that against some of their competitors. So we're not geniuses. We're just we're just putting the work in to make this decision quite easy. I think the other thing that I think is improving, but really needs work, is retailers need to actually communicate what they're doing on returns to their customer base. If you go on most websites, it can be very good, but I think the average is it's pretty poor. It's confusing. 5 years ago, it was more or less get stuffed in terms of a refund. These days, people are much more engaged with the consumer, but I think the returns strategy for a country or for a product should be very, very clearly communicated on the website for the retailer and also internally within their company, because that we've seen is one of the biggest blockers to getting returns right. They think they've got it right, but they haven't communicated it in a way that everybody understands exactly what the rules are. And people should know what your returns philosophy is, as well as your strategy is, as soon as they engage with you to buy something. So that would be my 2 pennies.
That's it. And customer communication, transparency, absolutely key in this day and age, and you're right to illustrate that.
Just to add to that, Ben, I'd also like to say that, echoing back to the collaboration piece, we need to be more collaborative in the supply chain. We need an agile supply chain, though, that can change to meet the changing demands of the consumer today. And we've got to act on data. It's got to be data-driven, so data-driven responses and strategies, and that's where the collaboration is going to really come into its fore as well. We need to act on the information that we've got, make reasons, decision, act on fact effectively.
No, it's a worthy point to make, Ben. We're winding things down slightly now, but we've got time for some final thoughts. Graham, you said you had plenty more to say, so here's your opportunity.
Sorry about that.
And no, it's good. A webinar without anyone saying anything would be a tricky affair. So, just before we bring this webinar to a close, any final thoughts for retailers about the future of returns? And I'm thinking long-term future, but also quite sort of immediate future in terms of going into peak and things this year. Anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I think peak's an interesting time, because I think before returns really got heated up, a couple of years, and peak was one peak, and it happened every time, every year about this time of year. I think what you've got now is a world where you get a peak every week, because it might not be a peak in the UK, but it's a peak in China, or it's a peak somewhere else. Retailers are selling on other people's platforms, they're selling through their own website. I mean, there's all sorts of complexity going on, so it's a relentless series of peaks, and I think that's probably one point, is that it's even more important to get it right now before it gets even more complicated. And it is getting more complex, but I think for me, there is definitely a reward there, and we've seen it. We've seen the difference getting returns right can make to a company in terms of, I'm a simple bloke. You get returns right because you can sell more. That's kind of the fundamental proposition here, and sell in the right way. But I think that the benefits are definitely there. You need to get beyond the statistics and get into some action. And I think that the people that you're seeing out there that are getting it right, I think their bravery and their innovation is definitely being rewarded. You just look at the growth rates and the profits of their business overall. And my last thought would be, be a leader. Don't be a follower. Don't be a follower in returns. Be a leader, because there's a real benefit to doing that.
Yeah, and something I'd quite like to underline here is I was at an event on this subject earlier in the year, and the time period between the Black Friday, Cyber Weekend, and Christmas is narrower than it's ever been, I think, this year. So puts huge challenges, creates huge challenges for retailers, and puts a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So kind of underlines why we're talking about this kind of thing today. Ben, chance for you to finish off. How do you see the future panning out? Is there anything you'd like to reflect on from what we've already spoken about today?
Going back to our first part about the rise of social media and buying habits, it's going to have a huge impact on online sales and returns. We have to have, or retailers have to have, a clear strategy on how they're going to manage that. Graham's absolutely right. There's a lot of great work happening out there in the marketplace at the moment, and collaboration is going to be key to making that great work better. I think we need to, as the online, the rise of social media, it's going to make it easier for consumers to purchase items. And with this in mind, supply chains are going to have to remain agile and keep pace with changing consumer trends and buying habits. Innovation in technology are key to achieving this. It's also important that our supply chains are driven by data. We can't make assumptions, and we need to place real consumer insight at the heart of our strategies. This will ensure that margin dilution is minimal and inventory management's good, and it'll help to drive future sales.
Helping drive future sales, a very pertinent point to end on, I would say. That's what it's all about, this retail game. Just like to say thank you, Ben from Advanced Supply Chain Group, for your input today, and Graham Best from Rebound Returns. Thank you so much for those fascinating insights. It's been a great conversation. Anyone listening in, feel free to connect with Ben or Graham on LinkedIn. or if you're looking for more information on some of the subjects that we've spoken about today, you can visit the websites advancedsupplychain.com or reboundreturns.com are the URLs for you. Yeah, thanks very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Hope you've got a lot out of it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Great.
Enjoyed it.
Excellent. And just on everyone's behalf, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening today. I hope you found some value. Anyway, bye for now. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.